Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and welcome back to Goose Junkies. Tonight for episode 30 and our final episode of season 2, before we come back for our Halloween special, which we'll announce in the end of this podcast, we have decided to do some back to school horror, and we decided to pick school horror with gray worlds involved. So we're going to be looking at, I think, in our very first comparison that we're doing on here, we're going to be just comparing a Goosebumps book straight up to a Are You Afraid of the Dark episode. We're going to be looking at Goosebumps' The Haunted School, and we're going to be facing it off against The Tale of the Photo Finish. As per usual, I'm joined with two great fellow panelists that I'm always tickled to see every week. We have BD and Micah. How you guys doing tonight?
Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night. It's your boy, the Horrorlander, your number one favorite horror hero, the baby mama bandit, and of course, the admiral of horror itself. So, of course, today we're talking about spooky and sinister school stories. The only thing scarier than that is the alliteration I just hit you with. So, get prepared. We got some back to school horror. And for all of you guys that are out there in school, for all of you guys that are out there in college, I wish you the best of luck because me and Mike are getting our asses kicked. So, we feel you. We feel you out there.
Yeah, I just finished up school not too long ago, so I'm thinking about you guys. It was rough. There was some rough times.
Yeah.
I've only got 2 years left.
Just hang in there, man. It only gets worse. But how are you doing tonight, Micah? How's school handling for you? How's work life balance and all
No,
that?
it's not bad so far. It's probably gonna get worse as the semester goes on. We're still only 2 weeks in, but at least I'm on Labor Day weekend, so I got a longer weekend than normal. So
True.
All right, so let's dive right into school horror, the gray world of school horror. And what we're getting at with that for this episode, we decided to pick two very similar feeling concepts. And all these people out there that always claim, "Oh, Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark" are two totally different IPs. Man, you'd be surprised if you haven't watched us for this long. There's a lot of blending going on. They're obviously taking from similar source material. I have no idea what possibly inspired the Haunted School or Photo Finish. Maybe Photo Finish was inspired by Haunted School. Who knows? What came first, the chicken or the egg, right? But they both feel similar in concept because we're dealing with evil photographer, possibly putting children into a gray world prison of sorts. So we're going to start off with the Goosebumps version of that idea. And BD, why don't you tell us about the haunted school and what the story's about and what's your thoughts on it?
The Haunted School is about this new kid in school named Tommy Frazier. Tommy Frazier is moving into school and he's in a very particular situation because not only is he the new kid to school, he had to abandon all his friends, but his dad remarried, so he's got a new mom as well. So he's like, hey, I don't know if you guys find this relatable, but I got a new mom, I got a new school, I got new people that I got to impress. So he's in a very tough situation. But he finds an opportunity to potentially make some friends because there is this dance decoration committee that's at the school. And when a teacher asks, does anybody want to be a part of it? He raises his hand right away. And he ends up meeting a girl named Thalia and another kid named Ben, I believe. And when he meets the two kids, Ben is kind of your typical Joker character, kind of gives Tommy a hard time. And Thalia is kind of a cool girl that he sort of more resonates with. And what ends up happening one day is as they're after school, kind of creating banners and drawing pictures for this up and coming dance for their school, the Bisons, they are missing red paint because Ben forgets to bring it. So Tommy, trying to impress after he had a very clumsy moment where he fell off the ladder and hurt himself, tries to basically redeem himself and he goes, okay, you know what? I'll go head up to the school and I'll go find the red paint. And Thalia and Ben basically both kind of look at him in a strange way. They kind of imply that maybe going upstairs in the school is not a good idea. He could potentially get lost. It's a little bit eerie the way that they're treating it. But he's like, you know what? No, no, no. I'll be fine. I'll head up there. And when he goes up to the school, he sees that it's very odd at the upper floor because there's a lot of boarded up rooms. It looks very dingy and creepy. And he swears that he can hear voices. And he starts getting paranoid. He thinks that maybe other kids might be up there with him. And eventually, he gets up to this boarded up room with these wooden boards on it and he pulls it off because he thinks that he can hear a boy and a girl talking from the inside. And when he goes there, he sees a room full of kids, only it's not kids. It's a room full of eloquently decorated mannequins of all these different kids with different looks and old clothing from back in the day. And he gets interrupted by a teacher. I believe she might be the principal or something. And she basically says, what are you doing in here? This place is off limits. And, he kind of, tells her, I'm sorry, I was trying to get some paint. I got lost. I couldn't find my way down back to the school. She guides them back. And he, of course, asks her, like, what's up with the mannequins? Why does this room exist? And she explains that the very first class of students in this school was back in the late 1940s. And what ended up happening was one day during picture day, all the kids had magically disappeared. Nobody knows how they went missing. All the parents and faculty were devastated that they all disappeared without a single hint of evidence as to why it happened. It was very tragic. So a local artist ended up making this room of mannequins to pay homage to him, which is why they all have old school clothing and they resemble the old class. So he's creeped out by that. And as he helps out Thalia and Ben, they go back to school. And during class, he swears he can hear a girl talking to him. And he thinks that the school might be haunted. And maybe the kids who are missing during this era might have something to do with that. And one day, as they're getting ready for the dance, one of their banners rips, and him and Ben head up back to the upper part of the school. And they enter this rinky dink elevator. And something weird happens. The elevator traps them inside. They can't get out. They press a strange button and the elevator moves sideways. And that's when they get transported to a limbo realm called Gray World. And Gray World, they find out, is where these missing kids might have gone to. And they figure out that this is a very dark place. There's a very sinister history involving what happened with this class of students, and they have to find a way to get out and potentially solve this mystery. Otherwise, their lives are on the line, and they might be isolated and trapped in this realm if they don't do what they need to do. That's essentially the plot of the story without me giving too much away. I read this book back during one of my early semesters in college when I got into Goosebumps. This was, I believe, the third Goosebumps book that I read when I got back into the series. And of course, I read it in a college setting. I read it in a school setting. So it helped out me getting immersed in the book. And I was shocked because this is one of the more deeper, darker Goosebumps books. And it recently has gotten a lot of love. It has a cult following. It's a fan favorite. But back in the day, people would not talk about this book. They would talk about a lot more of the pillar of Goosebumps, the big name iconic books. But Haunted School now has accumulated a cult following, and I'm very happy for that because this book is fantastic. In fact, it's so good, you might even think it's ghost written because there's so many things in this book that you don't think Stein would even delve into. First of all, Tommy Frazier. I have to say this up front. To me, Tommy Frazier is up there as my top 10 favorite Goosebumps protagonist. He's a really relatable guy. The way he's written in the book, when he introduces the fact that obviously he lost his mother, his dad remarried, he's got a new mom, he's got a new situation. It's very relatable. I have never had to move anywhere in my life, but Tommy Frazier's description of his life changing as he moved makes it relatable to me. An outsider like me can understand how a kid has to move to a new school might feel, especially with a brand new family member he can't even recognize as his own mother. And let alone making friends is hard. The school itself, the Bison School, has a great atmosphere. When you go up to the third floor of this school, the descriptions of how dark and dingy it is. He sees these woolen, like he sees like clothing that he thinks is like rats moving around. He hears voices in the walls, which is really creepy. And the scene of him entering this room of mannequins, hearing kids whispering and talking and turning around and just seeing these lifeless, detailed mannequins is really creepy. That's a really, really scary scene. And when you find out the lore about the school, the fact that a whole class of kids vanished without a trace after one miraculous day is pretty creepy. And it adds a lot to the story. And it plays as a really good red herring because you truly believe that the school is haunted. Except no, this is a whole other dimensional type of story going on where Gray World involves these kids being trapped for the rest of their lives. They lose all their color. In fact, they lose a lot of their emotion. And the scariest thing about the book is the main villains of the book are actually not some supernatural threat. No, the kids inside of Gray World actually ended up going crazy. They ended up losing their minds. And when you venture outside of the school, inside of this limbo realm, there is a parade, a cult of crazy kids who spit up black tar gunk, who try to remove all the color from anybody who enters in here. They're all crazy, they're all wild, and it feels like something Stein would never ever write, something he would never delve into. So the fact that this is in a Goosebumps IP is very refreshing and makes it extremely memorable. One of the most sinister books without it being over the top gory, without it being over the top scary. Just the implications and the themes make it very scary. It's existential, kind of similar to Twilight Zone, which is also helped by the fact that it's gray world and Twilight Zone was black and white, a show from the 40s and 50s. So that helps it out as well. And the potential hidden villain of the book, Mr. Chameleon, who you'll find out who that is. I actually, one critique I did have is initially when I first read this book, I wanted to know more about Mr. Chameleon. There's not much fleshed out story you get involving him as a villain. But now, upon a reread, I actually like the mystique of his character. I think the fact that Mr. Chameleon is this urban legend, he said, she said kind of thing that nobody can prove, and what he does to people is extremely sinister. So I think that gives him a lot of aura. It makes him a lot more threatening. It makes him a lot more intimidating. And the ending of the book may or may not tie into that. And I think that was really cleverly done. And it's a depressing twist ending because maybe in a way it's all for nothing. But I think the way it was written kind of helps it out. So overall, I'd give the book a 9.6 out of 10. In terms of the OG62, this is in my top 5, and I can 100% see why a lot of people have The Haunted Mask as their favorite book. So makes complete sense to me, and I'm excited to hear your guys' thoughts.
You mean the Haunted School, not Haunted Mask, right?
No, Haunted School. Of course.
I mean, you're not wrong about the Haunted Mask one either, but not what we're talking about here.
Great points, BD. Michael, why don't you continue on? Why don't you share your thoughts?
So I think this is definitely a very interesting Goosebumps book, especially for being so late in the series, where the series is kind of getting stale. The concepts were usually kind of on the weird, like bad or goofy side. Deep Trouble 2, Monster Blood 4. You had a couple of good ones with there was a good stretch of 3 at the end there with this, Werewolf Skin, and I Live in Your Basement. That was probably I don't know. It seems like Stein or the Ghost Writers, if there were any, really put a lot of effort into those 3 books in particular. And then we're completely burnt out by Monster Blood 4 happened. Because this book definitely has this kind of dark, very experimental idea with the story. It's not just your cut and dry Goosebumps formula. They have a very, again, it's, as BD said, it's very Twilight Zone-esque in a lot of ways. Kind of this whole alternate dimension story that they go with here. And I think bringing into the idea of this possibly being ghost written, I can kind of see that being the case because Stein once said when he was writing Goosebumps that he didn't want to put any real world issues into the books and because it would feel too real. And this book has a dead mom and a new step parent coming into the play. So that's a pretty real thing for a kid to go through. So that's, I don't know, I think that kind of gives me a hint that maybe it was ghost written since it kind of goes against what Stein said about what he wanted to do with the series. But anyway, getting back on topic. I think that this whole book has such a creepy atmosphere throughout it. The gray world is really interesting to just read about. I think that despite the fact that it does kind of go against Stein's formula or his writing rules, I guess, the main character is very sympathetic and he does a good job making you kind of understand what he's going through, despite the fact that I haven't gone through this kind of thing. I've never really gone through a new school before, except when I was really little, going into kindergarten. So at that age, it doesn't matter to you. But I still have both my parents are still here, so I can't really relate to that side. But he still has those sympathetic moments, so you can understand why he feels the way he does. And I don't know how else to describe it. It's just a very interesting idea for a book. I like that the title also kind of subverts your expectations because you look at a thing called Haunted School and you don't really think that is what you just don't expect this kind of story about this. Basically, this photographer who traps kids in an alternate black and white photo dimension. It's just not really what you expect from that title. And I really like how Stein or whoever wrote it subverted those expectations. I think the gray world again is a really creepy concept. Mr. Chameleon is just this. I don't know. I like that he's more mysterious and not very explained. I think that just adds to the character a bit more because like I always say, like I know a lot of people love to have stories that where the characters are like in-depth explained, but in my opinion, some of the more effective villains are the ones that are left mysterious. And I think a lot of the times in these movie franchises, like a lot of slasher franchises, they become less interesting once the villains lose their mystique and you learn more about their backstories, unless the backstory ties into them. But like, I don't know. I just think that keeping him more mysterious works better for the story and for his character. And also, I always love a good dark twist ending for Goosebumps, and this one definitely fits that category when you see kind of what is implied to happen to the main character and everyone else in the story. So I give this like a solid like 8.5 out of 10. I thought it was really good.
Yeah, and also I got to give a shout out to the cover. Probably one of the creepiest covers in Goosebumps because a lot of people don't notice that there's these just blank eyeballs looking through the locker. When you notice that in the book, the cover, it's pretty creepy just seeing these dead green eyeballs staring back at you in the locker. Pretty good
Yeah.
work, Jacobus.
Yeah, I never noticed that until like looking more in depth at it.
Yeah,
I think it shows that. And also, I think the testament to show just how popular this book is getting is the fact that it got a retro tin release.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's like, well, all the books to get a modern release, that is not one you would expect just because you don't hear a lot of people talk about it typically. So the fact that it got a release kind of shows, I think, that there is this kind of bigger fan base than we think for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I kind of group, especially when we're talking like 10 reprints. Like, not a lot of people talk about Piano Lessons Can Be Murder either. But then, like, when people do talk about it, they're like, "Oh yeah, this book is like crazy. Like, you need to read this one." So Haunted School, I think you both made great points. This was one of the earliest Goosebumps books I can remember reading. Actually, for me, when I was a young kid. And I mentioned the library story where I went to my public library and they had the hardcovers of the books, but they didn't have synopsis on the back. So I had to look at the covers and cover by most of the time, or if I wanted to peek through the books, which I normally didn't do, I could do that as well. But I remember seeing the cover of the Haunted School and being like, "What are those eyes? I need to find out what's going on and why these kids are in the locker." I remember thinking that. And then I read the book and was like, I wasn't expecting that. But it was one of those books that genuinely scared me when I was a kid. I was kind of afraid of the dark. I was afraid of things crawling on me under my covers and stuff like that. And often the night when I read these books, I was reading them under my covers with a flashlight. So I remember reading the scene when I was a kid where they first enter the gray world and they're walking along the wall, and Tommy and Ben both think that somebody's touching them and breathing on them. That legit like shivers up my spine. I can remember that, and that's something that's always stuck with me about this book. And I've always had an affinity for it, from actually making me scared as a kid. Because normally I really wasn't that creeped out by them, but this was one of the books that actually managed to kind of get a more visceral reaction out of me. Reading it as an adult, this is one of those books that definitely deserve a lot more credit out there in the community than it's gotten historically. Maybe because it was later in the book series, not a lot of people owned it. Who knows? Maybe it's just from lack of exposure. Maybe it didn't have an episode or whatever. Sometimes that plays a role. I don't know, but a lot of people need to experience this book because this book kind of defies the stigma people have with Goosebumps about it being just monster of the week, schlock, turn your brain off stuff, right? This is actually something of substance. This is something actually more thought provoking. It's literally like if you take Lord of the Flies and imagine it if Rod Serling in Twilight Zone were to take the idea and make a science fiction or paranormal story with it. That's what I got from it this time around, and I can appreciate that in a whole different lens because this is homaging something clearly out of the Twilight Zone. And now that I think about it, it's other stories that involve gray worlds as well, like Halloween Town 2, Calabar's Revenge with that gray world concept in that film, or Pleasantville with the gray world concept. They all kind of, I think, are borrowing from something of the same origin, but I can't figure out what it is. Somebody out there might know what it is. Please let us know. But they have to be taken from something because, as we'll see in photo finish, I think it's also taken from that as well. But nonetheless, I think you're on the money, BD, when you talk about Tommy. And not only Tommy, I think Ben is one of the best side characters in Goosebumps that I've read. They're all fantastic. And the way that the story handles characters is very smart. And you don't normally see themes woven into Goosebumps about bonding with people with shared trauma experience, right? And that's like a big focal point theme in the back half of the book, and like how these people have kind of bonded through this trauma. And we definitely see a reveal with a certain character that plays into that as well. And you see her monologue about what happened with her and why she's come back, and that hits in a deep way. Like Goosebumps doesn't really do that, you know what I mean? It's something that you can really only find in books like this, these little pocket books that you just find randomly. That's how this series really is at times. You randomly stumble across a book that will just have this deep stuff going on. That aside, the gray world concept is chilling. It still gets to me as an adult. I was kind of scared when there were when we read about Tommy hearing the voices and going into the classroom with the mannequin bodies and touching it and feeling like skin. That stuff creeps me out, y'all. I'm sorry. Skin, when we're dealing with skin, leave me out of it, dude. I don't want anything to do with it. That was some gnarly stuff. The stuff with the cult kids in the black and white world reminds me of something that Twilight Zone would have done in some existential horror kind of thing. It was pretty good. It works. The stuff in the dark, we're dealing with lights being shut off in the pitch black. Ben and Tommy feel like something is crawling on them. That just brought back memories of why I loved this book as a kid, because it scared me. Great reveals near the end, great recontextualization. I think this honestly might be tied with Curse of the Mummy's Tomb as my favorite written book from the original Goosebumps series. In terms, not necessarily how the plot unfolds in Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, but in terms of writing ability. Like, it has some fantastic monologue work, fantastic prose writing, imagery is very great. There's some solid atmosphere going on here. Solid pace. This book has some of the best pacing for a fast-paced Goosebumps book. Normally, when you get fast-paced books, they're just barreling through events and time skipping and all this random hoo-ha crap. This is very linear in terms of its pace. It is not skip over ridiculous amounts of time. It's quite actually is the opposite. It literally, stuff starts happening and it just builds from there, from the get-go, which is refreshing. But my only negative, I think Beatty kind of touched on this, is Mr. Chameleon itself, right? Mr. Chameleon, I know, Michael, you brought up the fact that sometimes the mystique does help a character, and I do like a villain working within the shadows, being kind of like the legend figure of the story, so to speak. I think that works wonders for Mr. Chameleon, but I feel like you could have had a little more there with him. You know what I mean? You don't need to give away all of his secrets, but you could have had a little more there to at least establish his connection with this gray world. Because I can totally see somebody who's a way more harsher plot critic looking at the gray world function, like how it functions, and some questions to be had with it, and possibly having a lot more issues than most of us would about it. Because if you really start to think of like, okay, well, does the story spend time of developing this gray world? Sure. But does it spend time of, building on things that you would think it would, involving said person who puts them there? No. You don't, like I said, you don't have to go into the whole motifs and all the origins and, how this gray world exists, whatever. All you need to do is just kind of establish how he came across it and, why he's compelled to put him there. That's all you need to do. You don't need to go any further than that. But yeah, honestly, I'd probably give this episode a 4.8 out of 5 stars. And one other thing that I think that makes this book pop. One other thing, and this has the haunted mask factor. The haunted mask factor. You have a countdown until crisis mode, where these characters literally have a death sentence almost put onto them. They have a time limit, like Haunted Mask. If the clock strikes midnight on Halloween, you are stuck. All right? That's how it works. You're stuck. If you run out of color on your skin or in your body in the gray world, you are stuck. You're never going to be able to get your color back. and a part of you is going to change forever. You got the countdown factor, you got that Haunted Mask X factor. And I love that in books. And this created a sense of peril that I think separates this book from a lot as well. But yeah, solid 4.8 out of 5 star book for me. It's a great book. A tier all day in the play.
Yeah, it's probably also got one of the most mature decisions in Goosebumps since the Haunted Mask 2 episode with Steve, because what Dahlia does for Ben and Tommy was pretty lit. That was pretty deep for a Goosebumps book, and that just shows that the characters in this book are really, really good for what they are.
Yeah, totally. Which brings us to Spongy. Let's get into Spongy's thoughts because I don't know if we brought up Spongy yet. In case you're new to this podcast, Spongy is our resident panelist who most of the time operates off screen. So we're gonna read off his thoughts for the Haunted School real quick.
All right. All right, so they said I've talked about this one before and there's a lot to say about it, but I'll try to keep it short. I really like the tragedy in this story with the whole class vanishing and ending up in the gray world. The ultimate. Can you check the audio real quick also? I think there's something in your background. I really like the tragedy in this story with the whole class vanishing and ending up in the gray world. It's sad and freaky how we see that some of the kids couldn't take the whole being trapped for everything and ended up going crazy. It results in that freaky ass black goo orgy, which is goofy on paper, but so effective and crazy in execution. There's a lot of good setup and payoff here that makes for some good storytelling. The mix of horror and tragedy makes this one a solid favorite for me. Dahlia works for the story, and the final note she ends up is a good one that adds further tragedy to it all. Maybe not a ton happens, but the pacing is still good. There are a few things that don't make a ton of sense, but the good stuff makes up for that. The twist is solid, and Mr. Chameleon being this unseen figure just makes it all scarier to me. It's cool that he's in Horror Town and gets fleshed out there. So yeah, as a late entry in the series, it really pulls out all the stops. It's one that I like to go back to a lot, and it lives in my head rent free. I'd like to say it. Well, so those are his thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, Spongy has a lot of great points, and I think we all keep coming back to him being this Mr. Chameleon being this shadowy figure and how that really does work for the book. I totally see why that's effective for a lot of people, right? Um, just like I said, I think I've gotten to the point where I just want a little more. Imagine if you got a Nightmare on Elm Street with Freddy Krueger, right? And we don't see Freddy Krueger at all doing the killings in the movie. You don't actually get to see his face. All we get to see is a shadowy figure, kind of mildly off screen killing people. Would that first movie be as iconic as it is?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Or like, if you got a Nightmare on Elm Street, and I don't know what's going on with the audio. Is everything okay?
It's my chair.
Yeah, I
I'm
was gonna
sorry.
say some audio stuff.
or imagine if you got a Nightmare on Elm Street, right? And you get down to the climax, and we don't get to learn necessarily the backstory of the parents putting them there, but all we get to know is that I don't know, you make up anything else besides that. Would that climax have hit the way it does with the parents being involved with Nancy and stuff like that? It just makes you think like sometimes you need a little bit of information to work with to make a story resonate a bit better or make it pop. And I'm not saying that Mr. Chameleon doesn't have its dark implications. He does. He did something really terrible to kids. He quite possibly is evil if he was the perpetrator. But the book is very vague if he is or not. The real villain is the gray world itself that corrupts children. It turns them into crazy people, right? So who knows? Maybe he could just be doing the work for the gray world. We don't know any of this information. It's all to be implied because he's only mentioned and only appears at the very tail end of the book. That's why I say it's a negative. I just want a little more out of Mr. Chameleon. But yeah, I think we're all pretty much on the same page. Ironically for me, I know we're not going to talk about it in this video, but Ghost of Fear Street kind of recycled this formula that was introduced here in Haunted School with a book called Attack of the Vampire Worms. I don't know if I'm spitting out a hot take. I think I actually like that book more, but it also has a lot of things that make Haunted School work in its veins as well. So if you're down to try that book, there's my recommendation for you to go try that one, because that one takes a whole different approach, and it's wild and it's crazy. It's pretty dark. And similar emotions going on in actual pretty much identical themes that Haunted School has as well. So But yeah, let's move on to the other gray world in the school story that we have to talk about, and that is the tale of the photo finish. So the tale of the photo finish comes from season 7, which is kind of adjoined with season 6 from Are You Afraid of the Dark as the overlooked 2 seasons. And in my opinion, we've already said this numerous times on podcasts together. We all seem to think that season 6 and 7 get an unfair bad rap, right? Obviously, by this point of the show, they were taking more risks in different ideas and approaches, but sometimes they were kind of taking from former episodes and kind of tweaking it. This one, if you've seen the tale of the unfinished painting, you or whatever that episode is, you might see some correlations there. But other than that, this story I think does a different take on the gray world picture horror, camera horror thing. And honestly, it has some things about it that I think are very commendable, especially when we're comparing it to the Haunted School. So the story is essentially about these two boys named Alex and Chandler. And Chandler, he's this uppity, ritzy kid who has, family money, and he's been tied for for many generations to this secret society of sorts called the Lions Club at this private boarding school. And his roommate Alex is his best friend, but his friend Alex is a scholarship kid. He has no ties to family money or anything like that. So he has to kind of prove his worth to the Lions Club. And the boys go through this weird initiation in the beginning of the episode, which you see them dip their hands in animal guts, right? I'm hoping no animals got harmed in the making of that episode, because that's gnarly if they did. If they actually used real meat there, holy crap. But after going through this ritual, we get to meet this jerk off character named Renfrew, who is like the typical white rich guy that you would expect at a boarding school in this type of thing. And he's an interesting character nonetheless. But Renfrew pretty much tells Chandler that, hey, your boy Alex, he's not going to be one of us, and you're going to have to break the news to him as a newly recruited Lions Club member. But because you haven't been officially initiated yet, you still got to pull a prank. You still got to pull your initiation and pay your dues one last time before you're sworn in. So Chandler, being the passive guy that he is, he essentially tells Alex, saying, "Hey, look, you didn't quite make the club, but I did. So can you help me pull this prank off?" And Alex is like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So they go and steal a painting, which just so happened to be a painting of a headmaster that apparently the night watchman and this fellow professor are kind of keeping under watch all the time for some reason. And they immediately get caught almost, and they take the painting back. They try to hide it, but they realize that the painting kind of falls off, and behind it is this black and white photo with this guy with the camera sitting on the porch. And they're like, okay, what is this? But they don't have time to think about it. They hang it on their cork board, and they have to completely divert the security away from their attention enough to get out of harm's way. Well, after the security guard leaves, they go to bed that following night, but Alex awakens thinking that he's hearing something communicating through him within the room, and it possibly might be this picture. Well, Chandler wakes up, and we see something happen to Chandler with the picture, and he possibly gets sucked into it. And this petrifies Alex. He makes a big spectacle scene. Of course, people think he's crazy and trying to prank everybody. And then Renfrew's like, dude, you don't have to prank us, dude. I'm sure Chandler already told you that you're not going to be in the club, right? So after that point, Alex is frustrated. He does some more research, and he kind of comes across some information that pertains to a kid who died in 1944 at the private school that kind of looks like the kid with the camera in the black and white photo. And this catches the attention of the professor from earlier. And the professor drops a bombshell about how he's possibly friends with this kid in the picture. And there was a tragic backstory to his death back in 1944 that possibly involves the Lions Club. And there may or may not have been some supernatural occurrences to bring this picture to light. And the picture might have done something to kids beforehand, and the professor felt compelled to hide it and what have you. So after learning this information, Alex tries to do something with the picture, but some other person gets involved with it, and Alex feels compelled to go to the origins of the picture, or at least what's inside the picture, which is an actual house that the Lions Club used to, be at. And this is where we get pretty much the rest of the story unfolds at this point, where we get to find out who exactly is in the picture, and the guy in question is named Jasper, by the way, what his motives are, and what he plans on doing with the Lions Club members and possibly Alex in the situation, and we see what results of that. So, what I really like about the tale of the photo finish off the bat, I think for Are You Afraid of the Dark standards, this is definitely out of their wheelhouse a little bit. Maybe not with a certain trope that we're going to talk about. It's quite a popular one in the show, but I do think that this doesn't really feel like much else that the show did by that point, so it feels refreshing by this point of the show, which is nice. I think for once, the goofy and corny humor actually works in the non-cringy way. Most of the time we say in Are You Afraid of the Dark, this show is cringy, it is corny, it is just goofy as hell. Yeah, this is corny and goofy as hell as well, but it actually works in that unintentional way. Kind of like how like the Tale of the Vampire Town works. Like you can laugh with it and not laugh at it because you're like, this is so stupid that it's kind of funny. So take that for what you will. But yeah, you have some over the top acting performances from Alex and Renfrew, especially. There are some really WTF moments and how they react to things, but it's all charming and it adds to the fun of it. And I think a lot of these later season episodes that we even have left to talk about have this quality to them. And I don't know, I think these are more charming than seasons 1 through 5 when it comes to the corny stuff for me. When it comes down to the villain stuff, at least when we're comparing this to Haunted School, I think that Jasper, his inclusion in the plot was really cool. And I like how we're going down the, you know, not necessarily the most overbearing trope in Are You Afraid of the Dark, but we're going down that morally gray trope. We've already touched on this when we talked about the Dead Body and Dead Bodies episode from Haunting Hour with Jake Skinner. Jasper has a lot of qualities of Jake Skinner in his motif, right? You have these qualities coming out that he's morally gray. He had a tragic backstory. He has understandable hatred and this vigilante justice he wants to carry out for these Lions Club members that it seems like most of the school hates for being exclusionary. And he's kind of doing the people's work. But he's so far gone in his hatred and his evil ways that he's kind of morphed himself into that he's too far gone to be turned good again. So you have to kind of put him out of the situation for everybody else's sake. He's now become a liability. And I think that does very well, especially given what the story is kind of talking about. When you're trying to compare his character to who essentially becomes the main character, Alex, they both have this symmetrical story going on. You have this backstory about Jasper being ostracized and outcasted by the Lions Club, and then you have Alex, who is being ostracized and outcasted by the Lions Club. But instead of taking the vengeful route and possibly still trying to play along in hopes of being recruited, he kind of comes to the point where he's accepted it. And there's a point in the story where he tells Renfrew, "Hey, did I let you in my room? Get out, dude. We're not friends. We don't have to play around anymore." Like obviously he's over the BS and he doesn't want to be a part of the elite club anymore. So you see that contrast, and it kind of works for the story's betterment in terms of themes and like trying to fit in. And then you have the whole. I know this is a weird subtopic you see today out in media, but you do have that eat the rich motif going on, where the rich are inherently snobbish and bad. And in this case, in this story, it definitely looks that way. So it works. It's not in that bad way or anything, but that's good to see. And while the story isn't scary, it does have a bit of emotions to it in that bittersweet, tragic kind of way. Like you don't really want to see this necessarily happen to Jasper, but you kind of understand why it does. And like I said, in that same vein of Jake Skinner. And when it comes down to my negatives with it, it really comes down to really only these things. And they both involve trying to cut out scenes for runtime sake, right? This was like a 24 minute episode show, right? They can only pack so much story into it. But for me, the climax and how the professor ends up there. Yes, I'm getting into mild spoilers with the climax. The professor ending up there, given the context of what information he would know, given what happens in the episode, is very far fetched. It just seems like, how did he know that Alex was in the house? Given that he told Alex his information, Alex went on his own accord and dealt with a certain person that possibly got put into the painting or the picture, I should say. And the professor would not know about that unless he had some interactions with some other kids off camera, which is, it just feels like, why are we excluding these little bridge scenes that are just less than 20 seconds to include? It just feels lazy a little bit. And the ending, I'm not a fan of how they wrap up the let's just say some two characters that disappeared in the 1940s involving the picture. Yeah, kind of lazy, but this is the same writer who wrote The Tale of Many Faces after all, so I mean, at least it's better than that reveal, but nonetheless, I think this is a very, very top tier Are You Afraid of the Dark episode. I'd probably give this like a 4.7 out of 5 stars. Truly, I really do mean that. It's a great episode. I would rewatch this over and over again. It's one of my personal faves. Maybe not the highest hitting Are You Afraid of the Dark episode by any means for me, but it's close. If it had a few tweaks, it possibly could be up there. So take that for what you will. And whoever wants to take it next, pass it over to whoever wants to talk about it.
I could go. So I did cover this video, obviously, in a separate review, and I did say in my review that this is, in my opinion, the most underrated episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark because of the fact that it comes from season 7. People do not watch season 6 and season 7 of Are You Afraid of the Dark. They basically assume the quality of it. And it's funny that when you watch both the seasons, season 6 has two basically hidden bangers due to the perception. You have Vampire Town and Secret Admirer, and then season 7 has Many Faces in this one. This one is about the closest thing you can get to the Haunted School adaptation. Goosebumps obviously never adapted the book, so if you wanted the closest thing, this would be it. And this episode is in my top 10 favorite Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes from what I've seen thus far. I would give it a 9.2 out of 10. I like the dynamic between Chandler and Alex. Chandler, for those of you who maybe you guys might not recognize because season 6 and season 7 are not watched, but Chandler, the actor who plays him, actually did feature in season 6 of Are You Afraid of the Dark. He was one of the older brothers in The Tale of the Gruesome Gourmets. So the man upgraded. He went from one of the worst episodes in Are You Afraid of the Dark to one of the best episodes. I like his dynamic with Alex here. The fact that Chandler grew up in generational wealth, the fact that his grandfather and father were both lions. So he has that family pressure to try to live up to their expectation and reputation. And he kind of sells his best friend short. His best friend is there due to scholarship, and they basically mistreat him. They kind of give him this fake hype, this fake buildup, and eventually Chandler has to make the decision: do I choose my friend or do I choose my reputation? And he ends up choosing his reputation to his downfall. And I do like the kind of lore behind the whole, like the photograph popping up, because you have the fact that the main villain of the story was a kid who actually used to be trying to be a part of the Lions. And because he was not like the rest of them, he ended up being made fun of, and they ended up chasing him off of the rooftop while making fun of him, and he plummeted to his death. And then all of a sudden, 2 months later, this mysterious photograph popped up that may or may not have led to people in the dorm rooms disappearing, specifically people who were lions. So I like that urban legend aspect of the story. Again, very much similar to Haunted School. Haunted School had an urban legend. This episode has its own urban legend. And I like that mystery behind the photograph. The basically one of the faculty members being an ex-friend of that character who turns out to be the villain. I thought that was a pretty good utilization of a side character, although some of the things that he knows, as completion is mentioned, don't make much sense. You don't get much context as to how he knows all these different things. It's sort of just plot convenient. But yeah, and then when you enter into the gray world section of the episode, I like the fact that they did not go into the whole sympathetic villain. No, this villain ends up being portrayed as sinister, being portrayed as a vengeful, bullied character, and they actually end up getting what's coming to them. So I actually commend the fact that Dark ended up decided to go down a darker route. And although the fate of some ex-Lions is kind of lazy in the way it's written, I do commend the fact that it also is going down a darker route. Something that the one of the characters reveals hints that potentially not everybody makes it out of here alive, and that does, in a way, add some stakes to the situation. It's not a kumbaya ending per se. There was actually some consequences of what happened. That some people who were innocent and some people who were guilty ended up getting punished for this whole event. So I do like that aspect to it. And the way that the villain is defeated is pretty clever. So I'd give it a 9.2 out of 10. If you want an episode that feels like The Haunted School, I suggest you guys watch this. If you want an episode that feels a little bit darker, feels like it has more depth to it, the photo finish is that. And again, this is the reason why I tell you guys to go watch season 6 and season 7. If there's hidden bangers in here that we like, there might be more episodes in there that are worth giving a watch. So please go check those out. Please give this one a watch. And in my opinion, so far, this is the most underrated episode of the show. But those are my thoughts. This is in my top 10. 100% recommend it.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you brought up that it feels like Haunted School, it like got an adaptation through Dark, kind of. I honestly feel like Haunted School could not be adapted book for book, like page for page. There's no way that budget would have made that book. They would have had to tweak some things and kind of bring it out. I think the showrunners possibly could have taken the Jasper approach with Mr. Chameleon and tried to make him a morally gray character. And I thought that while after I watched the episode and read the book, I'm like, I could totally see the showrunners from that 90s Goosebumps show going this direction, like photo finishes with the Haunted School, because they're trying to change the source material to fit budget. And sometimes that's why they did it, but sometimes they did it also to kind of fix hindsight issues. And because Mr. Chameleon wouldn't have been in the book as much, like we already discussed, they would have been like, well, okay, we got to put this guy in more. We got to figure out how to incorporate him better. So that's how I feel. In a similar vein, this could have been similar to what a Haunted School episode would have turned out to be, in my opinion. So, yeah, great points, BD. Let's pass it over to Micah. Michael, what's your thoughts on the Tale of the Photo Finish? I don't think I've heard you say anything about it, so let's hear your thoughts.
So yeah, I think this episode is actually really fun. I enjoyed it a lot. I think that the whole boarding school environment was really well done in there. Like you could definitely tell, it seemed like this had one of the higher budgets of the Are You Afraid of the Dark show. But while it's a simple setting and it's not something as extravagant as like the setting of Vampire Town, for example, it still is a very well done atmosphere. It's looks like an actual boarding school, and I'm guessing they probably just filmed it at some kind of boarding school. I'm not sure, and I don't know if it was a set. It was a damn impressive set, but I think that the characters are all well done. They're cheesily acted, but they're again, as you guys mentioned, it's a charming kind of cheesy. I think the best example of that is that campus security officer. That guy hammed it up so much in that one scene he was in, and he was great. Like that guy, you could just tell he was having fun in that one scene he had to film. It was being so over the top and just so extra that it worked so well for that scene and just made it more entertaining. I love the whole concept of like the whole ghost photographer being stuck in this picture, and if he takes your picture from the photo, you get sucked into the painting. I really love that concept. I think that's a really cool and unique kind of spin on this kind of story. I think that, Alex is he's kind of, I would say he's more of a protagonist than Chandler is, just because he's kind of the main player in the story. And he's really well done. While he has some shoddy acting moments here and there, he still makes the most of what he has, and he still does a good job. I think that snobby rich guy, the leader of the Lions Club, I can't remember his name, but like he is again very oddly acted. Like he kind of is almost portrayed as how a cartoon would portray a rich person. And again, it just works in this kind of goofy, charming way. And I think the actor pulls it off pretty well. And I don't know, I think the whole climax in that black and white house was really cool, really interesting how they did some of the visuals and like The defeat of Jasper, I think, is really creative and well done. There's just a lot of really interesting and fun stuff in this episode that I really like. I agree with your negatives, though. There definitely is some plot holes that could have been rewritten and fixed. That could have been really easy additions into the script. There's just some other weird stuff. The ending, again, is just kind of very mixed to me. As you guys mentioned, it's very middle of the road and how they kind of explain what happens to these people after Jasper's defeated. But overall, yeah, I think this is a really solid episode that I really enjoyed it. I gave it probably like an 8.2 out of 10, just barely etched underneath Haunted School for me, but it's still pretty solid, I think.
Yeah, I also forgot to mention that rich guy did give off like Draco Malfoy vibes. I don't know if anybody caught on to that, but he very much felt like that type of character, that sort of snob.
He felt like a Harvey's Comics character. Like, imagine Richie Rich, but if he was a douche.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what he felt like in that cartoony way. And like the scene where early in the morning after Chandler gets sucked into the picture and Alex is screaming like in that really goofy acting that the guy behind the character does, and he goes to the shower and Renfrew, I think the guy's name is Renfrew. He's in his shower robe and has a shower cap on, brushing his teeth. He's like, "What are you talking about, man? Stop pulling my strings!" And he wanders up, and then he gets his whole crew strap behind him. Like, where do they come from? Like, he's like coming in there, like, "Hey, man, you don't need to do this prank anymore because we're not letting you in." Like what a douchebag! Like, come on, dude.
Seriously, what the fuck kind of name is Renfrew? Like, that's just the most like cartoonish rich person name I've ever heard.
For real, he thinks he's Renfield, bro.
And then Renfrew, he wants to come in and into Alex's room without his permission. I'm like, dude, Alex is about to beat this guy's ass. Like, he looks like he's getting pissed off. He's putting down his coat. He's like, "Man, I'm about to beat your ass, or you're about to go in the picture. I'm about to do one or the other to you."
He also had that ending where like he puts on this like accent or voice the entire episode, and then by the end when they're like, "Nah, we don't want you, bro," he's like, "Wait up for me!" Like he puts on this like high pitched real voice, like he lets go of his real voice. And he goes, "Wait up for me, guys!" I'm like, "What the hell, bro?" That's some real cartoon stuff.
Yeah, and in terms of like Chandler's character, while I don't think he's a bad character by any means, I do feel like there is believable parts for me not to say this is a negative, but also him like coming to this idea to want to lead the Lions Club also feels a bit like, okay, dude, like we're getting into that mildly unbelievable territory. But given the fact that his best friend and roommate got barred from joining, and given that he kind of overheard, I guess Jasper's opinions about the Lions Club, maybe it kind of broke through to him. Again, we're talking about off-camera things. The episode sadly does. I mean, like I said, all the issues for me kind of stem to this. Them trying to cut corners because of runtime. And when you do that, sometimes you hit these little snags in the story that if you just put a little bit of attention to, 20 to 30 seconds tops a thing, this would have been way better as a result because you get better context. Sometimes you need context to help bridge the gap of events happening. You can't just be like, Professor's going to appear now in the climax because he obviously needs to be here to strike some fear into Alex, right? You need something more than that. You can't use him just as a device to make it something scary for a character or believably scary. You need to have something in terms of plot there to help the story out as well. And that's just food for thought out there, creators. But please, just follow that, please. That's all I ask.
And also, BD, when you're mentioning how Chandler's after kind of an upgrade from Gruesome Gourmet to this, talking even more of an upgrade with him, he went from Say Cheese and Die again to this.
Yeah.
Because he played Greg in that episode. And that's like horrible.
They say the third time's the charm. Man, he was in two god-awful episodes. Say Cheese and Die Again and Gruesome Gourmet, some of the worst kids' horror TV ever made. And he's the lead actor in both.
Yeah.
Come on, man. At least you got photo to finish. Some actors don't get that liberty. But
he went out with a bang.
He did. He went out.
That's better. That's better than the one dude from Haunting Hour who went from Phineas and Ferb to Poof de Fromage. That man went out with the shark. All right, it's better to go out with the bang.
Or the girl who went from Hannah and Ghost Next Door to Virtual Pets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into Spongy's thoughts, and then we'll get into which one wins here, because this one seems very close than usual for
Yeah.
Goosebumps and Harry Fair the Dog. I was kind of shocked for the book and the episode. I thought it was going to be like a kind of a landslide, but not really. So
Yeah. All right, so let's see. So he says, photo finish. Did you like the class themes of Wisdom Glass? Do I have the episode for you? That was more clever with it and directed how some poor people are viewed, but this is more eat the richie. You have this admittedly cliche setup of this snooty club that won't let Chandler's friend Alex in, so there's friction created because Chandler still wants to join. Alex is not rich, and there are some big snobs about that. The villain is Jasper, someone wronged by the club in the past who let his resentment grow. It's all solid thematically by showing how revenge can do too far. Jasper is mostly just fun with the actor, making him over the top, but there is a good bit with his old friend saying he feels bad for him. It's nice. It gets into some creepy stuff by the end, with the people getting sucked into these grave photos. Otherwise, there isn't much atmosphere in here, even if the Dutch angles want you to think that it's all more intense. They overdo it on that again. It's paced well with the steady build-up as we learn more and see people get trapped. It does borrow some elements of others, like unfinished painting, but at least does it well and creates a more well-rounded package. Chandler could have redeemed himself a bit more, given how he was to Alex, but I get there's only so much time for that and the ending is nice. It's not the scariest or most exciting, but the concept and themes do make it solid and well rounded. As I said, a good step up for Andy. Andy is kind of a dick to Tucker at the end, though, especially for what he did to him. Also, Patrick Thomas from Say Cheese and Die Again is in this. He has bad luck with cameras. And then for the comparison, okay, photo finish is good and all, but Haunted School wins. Photo Finish had solid themes and had creepy stuff near the end, but Haunted School goes a lot more hard with the horror and even the themes. It just does a lot more with the photo slash gray world ideas. Goosebumps isn't known for combining horror and tragedy themes, so it's cool that this one managed to pull it off. Photo Finish is a fair episode, and despite being fairly solid, it's not an all timer. Haunted School is an all timer, so yeah, it wins. Goosebumps gets a surprise W. I wouldn't say surprise W. Goosebumps mostly wins, but yeah, W mostly.
yeah, I have to agree with Spongy on the tragedy element. The only other thing that I've ever read associated with R.L. Stein that just screams tragedy was a Fear Street book. So like Goosebumps hardly does what Haunted School was doing.
Also,
Uh,
Jekyll and Heidi. Too.
Jekyll and Heidi as well. That's another one. But they're like there's so few that you have to kind of weed through everything in your mind to just find one. So that tells you something right there. It's not something on the forefront of your mind. Like Goosebumps and tragedy are together like peanut butter and jelly. No, it's not like that. So this book is like quite literally a hidden banger, or at least it used to be in the original 62. Um, which kind of leads me to my thoughts. I'll share mine real quick. I think they're both surprisingly close for me. Like I'm shockingly close. Now, characters, Haunted School's better. I think the horror is better in Haunted School. I think the concept is a bit cooler in Haunted School. So I'm gonna give the win to Haunted School here. But I will say, Are You Afraid of the Dark? You actually put something of serious competition up against Goosebumps with this. I do think that your villain approach was way better. I do think that your mechanism and how you enter the gray world and stuff like that was way better as well. And I do think that the implications of the villain being more morally gray, because the villain got more fleshed out. I think morally gray villains, even though it is a trope in Are You Afraid of the Dark, when it's done well in any show, Haunting Hour, Goosebumps, or whatever, it's good and it works here as well. It has some commendable strengths over Haunted School, if I had to say. And like I said, it does feel like I think how the showrunners would have done the Haunted School if they were to turn that book into an episode. I think they would have gone into a similar direction here. So a lot to commend here, but Goosebumps gets the win. But solid effort, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Not knocking it this time. Thumbs up. BD, which one do you think is better?
So this one's like a similar situation that I would put Dead House's book versus Dead House's episode. Dead House's episode felt like a more TV friendly, budget oriented version of the book, kind of fit for the screen. And I think that photo finish, I agree with you. It feels more like a TV friendly, budget oriented version of the Haunted School. But again, Dead House's episode was great. I think that photo finish episode is great. It's a great episode for what it is. And I still think that it's extremely underrated, one of the best, or I would say that this one is a heavy hitter for kids horror media. But The Haunted School, it's got a lot more time fleshing out characters. It's got more in-depth characters. It's got higher stakes. It's got less budget restraints. It's got more atmosphere. So it just feels like a superior version. It feels like photo finish is kind of Haunted School with some limits. If you took off the limits, you would get the Book of Haunted School. So naturally, I give the W to Haunted School. But for Are You Afraid of the Dark, this is a really good episode, and it's one of those things that, yeah, you didn't win this time, but every single one of you have to go watch the photo finish because I think a lot of you guys will enjoy, especially if you like Goosebumps.
Mhm. I definitely think it's a goosebumpsian idea, but it's definitely full fledged Are You Afraid of the Dark's approach to it. You know what I mean? Like you got the Cordy all over in display in photo finish, and I can see maybe that being a detractor for you, but I think most people will see the charm in it and kind of vibe with it. So, which leads us to Micah. I'm assuming that I know who wins here, but I'm assuming it's close for you as well.
Yeah, I would say Haunted School wins easily. I think that again, it's just the horror is much stronger in it. It just has that kind of it's more of an effective element. The gray world is a lot creepier, in my opinion, than that like black and white house setting that photo finish has. Well, I think that Jasper is definitely a better villain. I like the mystique behind Mr. Chameleon. I think that there's just again the characters are better in Haunted School. I mirror a lot of the same thoughts you guys said before. Like there's not much else to really say there. Haunted School is just a superior book overall, superior story, and yeah, I think it easily is just the winner here.
All right, so Goosebumps wins yet again. Valiant effort. Sometimes that's the case. Are You Afraid of the Dark? They go toe to toe to Goosebumps sometimes pretty close. They get them down to 9 rounds, but it matters about how many hits you got in the fight, right? So yeah, Goosebumps wins again, but Are You Afraid of the Dark tried. So I guess for our discussion tonight, um, because it's our last episode of season 2, we want to kind of do a fun one since both of you guys are back in school. We're going to talk about back to school horror, right? In general, right? Um, so I'm gonna pass it over to whoever wants to take this first. Back to school horror to you. Uh, what appeals to you in the genre? What are some of your favorites, maybe least favorites, if you want to discuss that as well, and just run with it.
Yeah, so I guess I could start. So I think Haunted School is the only actual school-based kids horror story that I think is genuinely great because it deals with a middle school. It goes into the entire middle school setting. Even the Gray World is featured in the Gray World version of the middle school. But I have a caveat with school horror. I think that a lot of the time the best school horror stories are boarding schools. I think boarding schools always end up being some of the best school-based stories. And if you don't believe me, I got 3 examples for that. First, you got Tale of the Hatching, which is a top 10 Are You Afraid of the Dark episode for me. I love how much it feels like a Goosebumps episode. It feels very Goosebumpsy in terms of story. It's got good pacing. It's got a real over the top absurd plot. It's got body horror in there, and it's even got some creature, mild, big monster action towards the end. So it's a good boarding school story. You also have Goosebumps, The Perfect School. That episode is really creepy. And The Perfect School and feels a lot like a sort of codename Kids Next Door idea. If a lot of you guys have seen Codes Name Kids Next Door, I always say that Perfect School kind of feels like that type of story. And it's a really good episode, in my opinion. I mean, it's got some intense stuff in there, especially with what he finds in the laboratory. The stuff that Brian finds in the laboratory is real scary and real creepy. So I like that. And the last story that's boarding school based is the Goosebumps book that I think should be the mascot book for Goosebumps. A lot of people got their Pillar of Goosebumps. Haunted School, Welcome to Camp Nightmare, Say Cheese and Die, etc. I think Creature Teacher from Series 2000 should be the mascot of Goosebumps because it doesn't set you up for false expectations of the series. If it's your first book, it embodies Stein's writing, just the best version of Stein's writing. It feels very much like R.L. Stein's writing compared to if you read Dead House, compared to if you read Haunted School, compared to if you read The Haunted Mask and stuff like that. So, Creature Teacher, it has obviously Mrs. Mark, one of the most iconic villains in there. And all three of these stories, boarding school works really well because it deals with isolation. When you go to middle school stories, a lot of the time the parents are still involved, faculty are still involved, and they might even be people who are trying to help the kids to the best of their ability. When you look at boarding school stories, there's no parent involvement. You try to contact your parents, there's no way to do that. And the faculty themselves are usually in on the horror aspects. So I think boarding schools usually end up being some of the best school based stories, at least in my opinion. But those are my favorites for the genre.
Okay, so we're keeping it kids horror mostly. I guess I'll take over and do some adult horror stuff. Um, Maybe some kids horror thrown in. You know, we got Halloween H2O, Halloween Town High. No, I'm just kidding. No, but honestly, my favorites. There's two that come to mind that I really love. One comes from the 1980s. It's a cult classic horror comedy film. It was produced by Ron Oliver. The third installment of this franchise was actually directed by him. So this is, I think, his first directing work. You might know Ron Oliver. He directed Say Cheese and Die. He directed The Tale of the Curious Camera, Tale of the Ghastly Brenner, so on, so on. A legend in 90s kids horror. But he made a movie called Prom Night 2, Hello, Mary Lou. And that movie is so batshit. It's so wild and dumb fun that I can't help just grin every time I think about the movie. It is so cheesy. It is so goofy in that first half, but the second half is just some of the best horror comedy stuff I have ever seen in my life. It is so great. I don't want to spoil anything. I love the movie to pieces. It's been a while since I've seen it. I need to rewatch it, but every time I think about that movie, I love it. And then another movie came out in the 90s. It was directed by Robert Rodriguez. It's called The Faculty, which is basically an adult Goosebumps story. It's very much like Calling All Creeps, but imagine if Calling All Creeps, like you're already in the just in the thick of the invasion, right? And all this stuff is happening. That's how it feels, and it has a star-studded cast from the '90s. I want to say what you have. Josh Hartnett, is Elijah Wood in it? I forget if he is. I want to
Mhm.
say he is, but I don't know if he is. You have Claire Duvall, she's in it. A few others. You have the guy from Terminator 2 in it, playing the coach. I think you have Famke Janessa in it. I can't remember exactly, but there's a lot of people in the movie that are very good. And the plot, like I said, it's a thrilling, like if you've ever seen The Thing from John Carpenter, this is like the closest thing that I've found in quality to that, where you can't trust because people are compromised. It kind of has that They Live vibe to it as well, or maybe the Invasion of the Body Snatchers going on. Um, and it works very well. I mean, look, Are You Afraid of the Dark tried to rip it off with the Tale of the Lunar Locust. I mean, it's almost, you know, we can honestly compare that at maybe at one point on one podcast if we really wanted to. But I definitely love The Faculty. I think it's a must watch '90s horror movie. There's not a lot of great ones from that time, but this is one I would put up there. And I guess if I had one last favorite school horror, or actually, no, I'm actually going to turn it back temporarily off this topic and go back to Gray World stories for a minute. You need to watch Halloween Town 2 Calabar's Revenge, y'all. Look, Gray World concept, BD, everybody touched on it in this podcast. You kind of lose yourself. You kind of lose part of your emotions when you're in the Gray World. Halloween Town 2 Calabar's Revenge does exactly that as well. You got these Grey World counterparts running around Halloween Town because there's a spell put on to the town from Cal, who is this son of Calabar from the first Halloween Town. And Marnie and her friend Luke have to navigate through Halloween Town with their grandmother to find the spell book to revert the gray spell. And it's just iconic to me for that decom cheese that it offers. I love the concept there. It works kind of similarly here, except you don't have the whole pocket dimension thing. Well, actually, you do because Halloween Town technically is one, but still, you don't have the same trope of it being like a photograph or a photographer doing this. It's just a world of Halloween beings that I really enjoy. Um, so yeah, that's all I have to say about school horror, Brave World stuff. I think those are great, and you should all go check those out. Especially if you like cheesy horror, go check out Prom Night 2. If you like some late '90s stuff and you haven't seen The Faculty, check that out. And if you like DComs, go check out Halloween Town 2. Um, I'll pass it over to Micah now. Micah, what are some of your favorite school horror stuff?
Well, I haven't seen a lot of like specific movies that or shows dedicated to school horror. There are definitely some sequences from movies that I think fit this category. Like the main standout example is Nancy's nightmare in the school in the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I think that whole scene is just incredibly well done and effective and just creepy. How like it starts off like she's just sitting in class, and at first you can't tell if she's awake or asleep, which I think is like one of the biggest strengths of that first movie is that it blends the dream and reality so well together. Like it's almost hard to tell whether they're dreaming or it's a real world thing sometimes. But she's in class starting to fall asleep, and there's these odd things that start happening, like the guy in front of the class reading that poem suddenly gets very gravelly and kind of creepy sounding. She looks up and you see Tina in a body bag, like all bloody, just like reaching out to her and calling her name. And Nancy like starts getting weirded out, stands up, starts walking out into the hallway, sees Tina in the body bag get dragged down this like opposite hallway. And as she follows her, of course, is an iconic scene of her running into the hall monitor. And when she looks back, the hall monitor is Freddy, and he like has a sweater, the "no running in the hallway" scene. That's one of my favorite scenes in that movie. Just like, I don't know, like Robert's delivery of that line is just great. And then it just progressively gets more sinister and creepy as it goes on. She goes down into the boiler room, and it has the like I think this is her like first actual encounter with Freddy in this movie that like we see on screen. And he comes out of the shadows. He has that scene where like Rip pulls up his shirt and like slices his chest open with like the pus and maggots coming out of it. And like just the whole thing where he just, she's chasing her through the boiler room and is just slowly like toying with her and is like laughing maniacally, and just like everything about that is so scary to think about. Just the idea of being and the point when Nancy gets cornered, and just this whole scene of being trapped with this killer coming towards you slowly and having that feeling of no escape. And then she realizes, she burns herself on that pipe to wake herself up. And like that whole scene is just so effective and well done, especially because for a lot of people, school, while you don't like school, it is kind of a safe space for you. You're safe, you're protected. So just kind of ripping that out from under you, even if it is just a dream, it's still just is a very effective scene in that case. I also think the scene in the first Scream movie when the principal gets killed in his office with Ghostface, I think that's another really well done scene. There's that great little reference to Wes Craven as the janitor dressed as Freddy, and I love that little reference there. It's a nice little like cameo for Wes Craven. I think that was great. And just the whole scene of the principal kind of being on edge throughout the whole scene and like not really knowing what's going on, getting kind of stalked by Ghostface. And then that, when he eventually comes back in and Ghostface just pops out and kills him. Like, I don't know, while it's a short scene, I think that atmosphere is really well built up. There's some fun jokes in there. And, Scream is one of the great horror movies. I love Scream. So that scene really just stands out from that movie. In terms of like a least favorite or not a favorite school horror, I know you mentioned this one, PD, but Perfect Schools episode, I do not like that episode. I think the whole clone scene in the basement is cool, but like it did not need to be a two-parter in my opinion. I feel like while I do understand the concept could be more fleshed out, I just think the episode drags. It's kind of boring at times. You don't really get a lot of the clone stuff until I think part 2 from what I remember, and like I don't know, it's just never been an episode that I particularly enjoyed. And yeah, that's all I got to say about it.
I think it's fun that school horror has so many deviations. I mean, a long time ago now, we did an episode about school basement horror with Mascot and Jake the Snake, and then you have boarding school, which is like Tale to Hatching, Perfect School, Photo Finish. I mean, boarding school seems to be a popular one. But it seems like Fright Night from Slappy World is another example of school-based horror where school basements are involved. But it's kind of hard to find stuff that takes place solely in the school. I guess Phantom of the Auditorium is another clear one we can look at, or
Blocker 13.
Blocker 13. What is another one? We got the one from Are You Afraid of the Dark that we faced off against. Why am I blanking on it? Was it It was the one where we faced off against Phantom of the Auditorium. The guy with the hunchback.
Or Last Dance.
Till Last Dance, right? And you have the Carrie homage and stuff like that. Carrie is a movie set in a high school, basically, for a good amount of it, especially in the back half of it. I mean, there's lots of school horror to be had, and a lot of it seems to be more on the solid side. You know what I mean? It's like hard to find a bad school story. I mean, look, What's Cooking from the short story from Goosebumps. Probably one of the best Goosebumps stories out there, in my opinion. Like easily top 5 faves just across the entire franchise in terms of just book stories for me. Fantastic story, one of the best. I mean, there's so many out there. I mean, like I'm trying to think of a bad one. I don't think there really is one.
Got a few Bone Chillers
Teacher's Pet.
Maybe Bone Chillers. I haven't read most of them.
The Teacher's Pet short story.
Teacher's Pet, yeah.
Teacher's Pet short story, yeah. Okay, that's a middling one, yeah. That's not
There's
good.
a few middling ones.
But nothing outright like terrible, I would say. Like outright terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, school horror, some of the most sound stuff you can find, which is kind of perplexing. But maybe I don't know if it's the location that kind of brings out the creativity. I don't know what it is. I think even like Alien Candy from now thinking about Alien Candy from Haunting Hour is mostly in a school.
Terrible Love, Detention.
Terrible Love, Detention. You have School Spirit from Nightmare Room.
The Unfortunate Five from Creeped Out.
From Creeped Out. I mean, there's a lot of solid stuff. Go check out some school horror, y'all. Like if you're new to kids horror, and you haven't tried a single show because you're afraid of the stigma that kids horror brings, like all this stuff is the same, right? Check out school horror stuff. Yeah, some might run the same, but some stuff is mostly quality. And a lot of the things you're going to find is really high quality, especially for the genre, which says a lot. It's just one of those things that I guess is kind of like the bread and butter that Hollywood's going through these days with like supernatural ghost possession movies. For kids horror, you can't go wrong with a school-based one, or maybe a camp one. Sometimes you can get a less than stellar camp one either, but most of the time it's schools or camps as the settings. When you get those, you're pretty much in for at least a decent ride. So.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So that's all we have for this episode, y'all. Thanks for watching the whole way through. If you have, we really appreciate it. Like we said, this is the end of season 2. We will be coming back after a few months, but we do have planned a Halloween special. We want to come back for this Halloween because it's marking the 1-year anniversary of this podcast. So we want to do something special. And since we started with the Halloween episode for episode 1, we faced off the Haunted Mask and the Tale of the Twisted Claw there. We want to do another Halloween face-off, and I bet you a lot of you have been waiting for this one. Long time coming, but we're finally going to do this. We're going to face off Attack of the Jack-O-Lanterns from Goosebumps, and we're going to face it off against the Haunting Hours Pumpkinheads. And we're going to see which one is better there. So stay tuned in October sometime for that episode. It was great filming this season 2. We can't wait to come back for season 3. We have a whole list of things we still got to do and we still want to talk about. And we're excited to come back. Hopefully, once school is over and everybody's stress level goes down a bit, because I know how these two are trying to grind through school and juggle YouTube and all that. Much appreciated. And we do this for you all at the end of the day, but we also have some things to take care of as well. So I hope you all understand. But if you're not already subbed to me, feel free to drop a sub. If you're not following the Goose Junkies podcast on here, I do have a playlist that's also set up with YouTube podcasts where you can check out all the episodes that we've recorded and placed on here for you all for your entertainment. Check out some that catch your eye and you see a topic that kind of interests you or whatever, or book or movie that we discuss. Feel free to watch and give us your thoughts about which one you think is better. If you've seen this episode, let us know down in the comment section. Do you like Haunted School? Do you like the Tale of the Photo Finish better? Please go sub up BD Horror. Please go sub up Ultimate Goosebumps, man. Go follow them on their socials. Please go check out Spongy444's blog on his WordPress account that he has set up. He also does reviews on Goodreads. He does reviews on Letterboxd. He's a great reviewer. He has an X account where you can go see his reviews on there as well. Really knowledgeable guy. Please go show him some more love. I know he doesn't have a lot of face-to-face interaction here on the podcast, but he is a heavy, big instrument for us behind the scenes in the Discord server. And we really do miss him, and we hope they can come back on the podcast one day. Again, face-to-face. But until next time, y'all, it's been real. Hope you all have a great few months while we take a little break, and let us know down in the comment section, or maybe we might do a community post update, or you can comment on our next podcast that we do. What would you like to see us cover? What would you like to see us face off? I think that's a good question to throw out there for you all, and give us some answers and come back to us. Till next time, take care. Have a wonderful evening, and see you later.
This is